All right, welcome to the 1.6 preview video. We'll be closing out Module 1 by talking about adventure stories. And so I think we'll look at this from an ecological standpoint. What we want to do is incorporate everything we've learned in the first module, going all the way back to Fall and Recovery, Adam and Eve, all the different ways of reading all the way forward. And so I subtitled it Wilderness Survival and Adventure. But we just don't want to... We want to enjoy these stories as people who are braving nature, daring nature, doing all these things that humans do. We want to analyze a bit more why we do this. Is that all that's going on in these stories? In many ways, we started this unit when we read Big Two-Hearted River, and we were already flirting with questions of why is Nick in nature? Is he an adventurer? Is he there for power and to dominate? Does he just appreciate nature? Does his knowledge of nature take him beyond appreciation into something toward the ecological or living in harmony with nature? If he's only living in harmony with nature and getting something spiritual out of it, does that mean that he's living ecologically? How can we give an ecological reading of the story? And I very briefly at the end of the second video, the review video, dealt with that as well and how we might give a brief ecological reading. And so today I'd like you to do the same with a very, very famous novel, nonfiction, actually, so I guess I shouldn't call it a novel, but novel-length piece of nonfiction called Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, and perhaps have even maybe read it before. We're reading the first 3 chapters. Okay, so we can take a look here. The basic background is given. There is McCandless. A fascinating book. My big goal is actually that you read this and you like it so much you go buy the novel or get it from the library and read it. It's an absolutely outstanding book. I think it has enough setup in the beginning to tell you about this, but Chris McCandless, the main character, came from, as it says, a well-to-do family, and he was looking for something, and nobody's really sure because he didn't leave much of an intellectual trail as to what he wanted out of this. But he went off into the wilderness in Alaska, and was there for about 4 months, and then he died there. What you'll find as you read the opening chapters is that he was probably no different than anybody else, at least in appearances, but that he wanted something else. He left behind this easy life to go into the wilderness for some reason. And we don't know why exactly. That's the great mystery. That's the great mystery behind the whole book. And so in this way, he's a lot like Nick, right? We know that Nick went looking for something. We know that it's very, very open to interpretation, who Nick is, what he's looking for, what his relationship with nature is. And we get the same questions in this story on Chris McCandless. And that's what I'd like you to think of when you're reading Into the Wild, okay? I have a set of questions to help you out with that, of course, as I always do. Get to read and appreciate this piece of its own accord, but you can also, so you know what I want you to do with this, or what I think will give you an easier reading experience and give you more to say in your post, is you can start to compare them to Nick. How are they the same? How are they different? That's one big thing you'll want to deal with. The other thing that we can always do is, of course, apply the major ways of reading environmental literature that we've learned so far in the course. We've got Fall and Recovery, Domination, Stewardship. We've got ecological ways of reading. We've got Spirit, Object, Resource. If we're talking ecological balance, that is Chris McCandless, our character here. Does he plan on living in ecological balance, interdependence with nature? Does that seem to be the viewpoint? If we compare it to Nick and how Nick gets his food and what Nick shows up with, is that similar or different than what Chris McCandless shows up with? Another really interesting thing will be ideas of the pastoral. In Big Two-Hearted River, we had, some elements of sort of, it was a soft pastoral. He's there, he's enjoying himself, he isn't horribly uncomfortable, but that the swamp represented the place where people dare to go, where you must be an adventurer, where you have to prove yourself, or you're testing yourself in some way. And so that made Nick an anti-modernist, put him as someone who believes in wilderness and gave him an adventurer's spirit. Are those the same type of attitudes that you see, these ideas of the pastoral, and the way that we define wilderness and nature and use them? Do we see these in Chris McCandless as well? And so that's what I'm asking you about here. I'm not going to say too much more about it. You've got some really good questions to just kind of guide your thinking. I've said pretty much everything I want you to be thinking of. And so this reading is just for you now and to see what you see inside of there and connect it back to themes from our course, ways of reading for our course. And you can use Nick Adams from Big Two-Hearted River to give you a sense of comparison and contrast as well. The other really fun reading, as long as we're doing adventure, I thought I would do a pure adventure story, and I'd give you something on surfing to read. I've never surfed in my life, but I hope you enjoy this piece. And again, asking the same questions. This is an adventure story, clearly. What makes it compelling? Why do people like to read about dangerous activities? So why do we like the pure adventure stories? They resonate with us for some way. So what's your theory on that, right? What do you see as the main point of the story? It just seems to be relating experiences in some ways, but what is the point of all of this? So comment on that. You can then, as always, connect here with these surfing these huge waves that are wild and uncontrollable. How does that link back to these or any other ideas from our course? Free to comment on that. And then you might compare the surfing adventure story by Mark Fu with Into the Wild. And again, Into the Wild, we have to ask the question, is this a pure adventure story? Mark Fu's occurrence at Waima Bay, definitely pure adventure. But Into the Wild, much like Big Two-Hearted River, is complicated. It's part adventure story, but that's only part of it. There's something much larger going on, and it teaches us about our relationship with nature, what it means to be human, what we desire as our ideal relationship with nature. And so turn back to that question to end things. And that's a great way, I think, to end our first module together, is to sum up all the ways of reading that we have, all the different relationships with nature and defining nature, and then asking this one big question about this man who went into the woods looking for something. What he found was his death, but what does that mean? Was that okay? Was that part of what he was looking for because he had turned his back on society and moved on to a larger relationship with nature? So we'll leave you with that. Looking to the future then, you will have a review video for Module 1 where I'll essentially remind you of everything we've learned that will be eligible for the midterm exam. And in that video too, we'll probably have a few practice questions, and I'll show you how you might approach answering the midterm questions as well. All right, hope you're enjoying the course so far. I certainly am. I'm going to read Into the Wild. We'll see you soon.